Hello, everybody, and welcome to mindbodygreen's beauty podcast, Clean Beauty School. I am your host and mindbodygreen's beauty director, Alexandra Engler. On this podcast, we explore beauty through the lens of well-being. And on today's episode, we are discussing the Joy of WellBeing. The Joy of WellBeing is the brand new book co-authored by today's guest, the co-founder of mindbodygreen. This is a very, very, very special episode. I cannot wait to get into this and just dive into the wonderful topics discussed in this book. So without further ado, Colleen, welcome.
Alex, I'm so excited to be here and to be able to chat with you today. So thanks so much for having me as your guest.
Well, thank you for joining. I normally start off these episodes by allowing the guest to kind of explain their journey into beauty. You're a little bit of an exception. I feel like any listener of this podcast probably knows a little bit about your backstory and your journey into wellness. But to shape out this story and shape out this episode for anybody who may not know your journey and the shaping of Mind Body Green, I just want to hear a little bit more in your own words of what was your journey into the wellness world and why did you start Mind Body Green with Jason?
So I had a journey into health and well-being, which was really driven by personal necessity. I had one of those edge cases that you hear so much about, and I think was part of the early wellness and well-being movement, in that I had a near catastrophic pulmonary embolism when I was in my early 30s, and living what seemed like a decent life in New York City. I was working hard, did what you do in your early 30s, went out to restaurants, probably drank more than I should, did a lot of physical activity. And one Saturday morning, I went to Tara Stiles' Strala strong yoga class, which was my Saturday morning ritual. And after leaving class, I was walking around the West Village and I felt a little bit out of breath. So I called my husband, Jason, to come in, and we walked around the city. And then I was like, I just need to get home. And so we got home, and as I was taking the A train back to Brooklyn, there was a very steep subway station there. And I collapsed as I was trying to get out of the subway stairs. I ended up getting out of the subway station and called my doctor and did what so many women do. I gaslit myself. I gaslit my own symptoms, even though what I had experienced was completely out of the ordinary. And then for the rest of the weekend, I was super lethargic and tired and took a bunch of naps, but didn't want to go to the NYU ER on a beautiful May weekend. So come Monday morning, Jason was like, if you're going to work, you have to stop by your GP on the way. So I stopped by my GP, and within 3 minutes, he was like, you're having a pulmonary embolism. And I was totally bewildered. Didn't really know what it meant, but had heard of the concept, and it's blood clots that have traveled to your lungs, which, can be fatal if it happens too long. And so I got a little card from my doctor that said I'm having a pulmonary embolism. It was unclear if he was worried I wouldn't be able to articulate myself once I got to the ER, if he was worried about me getting there. But once I got there, I had showers of clots in my lungs. So I was really truly lucky to be alive. And I, kind of look back on this experience, and it was the start of really immersing myself. I had been interested in health and well-being before, but this was, one of those breakdown moments, inflection points in your life where you truly change things. And I wrote an article about this experience on Mind Body Green that went, very viral. And the only clotting factor they really found for me was that I had been on birth control pills, which I remember when I got on the pill in college, you had to actually take a multiple choice test. I think all the questions were more centered around not getting pregnant and not really addressing kind of like the risks associated. And I'd heard there were risks, but I think since I wasn't a smoker, I had kind of dismissed them, which obviously, we shouldn't do. But this was the start of a zigzag journey where I explored everything from Western medicine to, holistic healers, which were a little bit outside my comfort zone. I mean, I delved into everything from astrology to intuitives to readings. And, the book that we've created, The Joy of WellBeing, is a roadmap that I wish I had when I was at this juncture, but also just how I think we should all live their lives, because we shouldn't have to wait for one of those breakdown moments where you hit the rock bottom of the soul to kind of check in with yourself and evaluate, am I living a well-lived life?
Yeah. And, in your story, you talk about how you went to all these great lengths to find solutions for your own health. And what I find inspiring about this book is that so much of what you guys offer are, simple solutions that you can fold into your daily life and make it easy for folks. So, I'm curious, when you guys set out to write this book, what was it like crafting the mission statement behind it? What was that process like when you said, okay, like we have amassed so much knowledge and, so much research through your time at mindbodygreen. Let's take that and let's turn it into, this digestible guide for folks. Like, basically, why did you decide to write it?
Back at the start of mindbodygreen, the word wellness was not part of the zeitgeist like it is today. It existed, of course, but we weren't really using that word to describe ourselves, and it didn't have kind of the peak popularity that it does now. And now, when we look at the health and wellness world, we don't entirely see ourselves a part of the solutions that are offered. I see the extremes within wellness that somewhat marry, the political extremes that we have. There's so many extremes right now within our country. And, on the one hand, you have people who are optimizing with protocols and biohacking. And I listen and I study and I observe, but I'm like, I don't understand how this could fit within my life right now. And then on the other hand, you have what could be considered, Kardashian wellness, where it's a bit more of a focus on the frosting, so to speak, than actually baking the cake. And I like frosting, don't get me wrong. There's lots of, wonderful tools and tricks that bring a lot of, joy to my life. But I think when there's too much of a mismatch, of a focus on too much of the frosting and not enough on the fundamentals, we're just not going to see the results. So as people who are deeply passionate about these practices that have truly saved both of our lives and helped, cultivate a well-lived life, we wanted to bring more airtime and more focus to these tools that are time-tested, that so many of us can agree on, and also integrate the possibility of joy. I worry that we've become so disconnected from what that truly is. And, if each of us can ask ourselves, what is it about our lives that bring us joy? And I think it's a question that I found the need to check in on with myself over the years, over the seasons of life, over the decades of life, because it changes and evolves just as we do. And, as I think of the longevity conversation, especially for women, it's not just about living a long life anymore. That was kind of the 1.0 of a lifespan. And then it turned into a conversation of health span. And now, we want to set the bar higher and not just live a long life, but really have moments and experiences that bring us joy along the way.
Yeah. I really quickly just want to touch on the joy aspect, because I do think it is such a critical part of this next evolution of well-being that you're speaking of. I think people have gotten so wrapped up in making sure that they're doing all the right things and they're checking all the boxes that it has become tedious and tiresome. And I think that's why a lot of people there is a little bit of that backlash that you see, where people just opt out of it entirely, which isn't the solution either. So I think the joy part is so critical. When you guys set out to write this book, what was joy always the centerpiece, or did that come later when you guys were, in the midst of it and you're like, oh, joy is the point of this,
Yeah, I think, now when I think of what's been, some of the biggest shifts that we've seen within health and well-being over the past 10 years, and specifically over the past 3 years, mental health has always been a focus, but the conversation around mental health has obviously moved to the forefront in this post-pandemic world. And we think this idea of connection is probably the most underrated topic that no one's talking enough about within health and wellness. You've got fitness influencers, you've got beauty influencers, you've got nutrition influence, but where are my connection influencers that are singing the praises of, cultivating friendships, which to me is such a huge part of the joy conversation. So, I think to answer your question, it was always a through line, but the kind of pillars that, really resonate with us in this world in which we live in 2023 is this idea of connection and something bigger, because we feel that they are able to have the most impact on your life and are probably the most underrated ones that people aren't talking about enough.
Yeah. So the book is called The Joy of WellBeing, not The Joy of Wellness. Why?
So it was a very intentional word choice, because when I think of the word wellness, and I see the very valid critique of these two extremes. And there was a point in our lives when we were at the forefront of this conversation, and we're like, wow, we can't even do this and fit it into our own lives, and this is literally our job. So there was an intentional evolution from wellness to well-being. My objections with wellness is that I think it comes from a place of restriction. What am I taking out? What am I limiting? What am I not, doing that maybe would have been, fun in my life, so that I can get on this path, protocol, whatever you want to talk about. And I think well-being comes from a place of abundance. How do we bring more joy? How do we cultivate something new? So it's a little bit of a reawakening. It's a little bit of a mindset shift, and definitely an intentional kind of next step as we as humans go on this journey together to figure out what a well-lived life means.
Yeah. You guys have researched and talked about so many different aspects of the health and well-being industry for so long. And mindbodygreen has covered quite a bit of topics in the decade plus that it has been, it's been a part of the industry. And I'm curious, in researching this book, was there anything that surprised you, and anything within the research that re-inspired you in a way? Just because I feel like you guys kind of knew it all. Was there anything else to learn?
Yeah, so I go back to the two last pillars of the book, and I'll start first with this idea of connection. And there's an interesting study that shows that nutrition has about a 20% impact on your mortality rate. Exercise and movement and dialing that in is about the same at 30%. But connection, being in a good relationship, having friends, having a partner, can actually impact your mortality rate by over 45%. And I found that hugely, hugely inspiring. And, we don't really learn how to build connections, how to maintain connections, how to foster connections as we go on life's journey. And that was a really, kind of like mind-blowing statistic for us. The other one that had and continues to have a really big impact is on the something bigger chapter. The PhD that we reference in this chapter is actually a fellow Miami resident, Dr. Lisa Miller, who teaches also at Columbia University. And there's a study on girls, mothers, and spirituality that has had a profound impact on our lives. And it's essentially that if the woman and child are high in spirituality, that child is 80% more protected against depression. And, replace mother with father, parent figure, just the idea of having a strong spiritual influence in our lives. And, as you probably know from your role at mindbodygreen, there's a lot of times when you can kind of predict what's going to start a conversation in our social community, on our site, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes you can predict it, and sometimes you can't. And this concept has definitely sparked a chord in our social community. And what I really love about Dr. Miller's definition of spirituality is that it's so generous to belief systems. Yes, it could be religion. Yes, it could be, maybe spirituality as the wellness world participates in it, but it's really at its core this idea of something bigger, which could be spending time in nature, a transcendent experience. It could be volunteering. It could be serving others. And it really gets us back to this idea, that we're all connected in this world. And when I think of kind of like the why and my purpose at mindbodygreen as a human, it started from this edge case where I was trying to solve my own kind of health issues. And now, as a mom to two girls who are quite young, almost 4 and 6, the mental health crisis is something, that literally keeps me up at night. And I think it's hard to be a human right now. I think it's hard to be a boy right now. I think it's particularly challenging to be a young girl. And so this chapter is something, that Jason and I reference and go back to of, finding authentic ways to cultivate these spiritual practices into our life and to our girls' life so that they see it happening and, can hopefully be building more of that mental resilience that we all need a little bit more of.
Yeah. And I think people, and I even put myself into this category, at least I did a few years ago, they hear spiritual and they immediately think it goes straight to religion or, go straight to that woo-woo category, right? But even in my own spiritual journey, which has been evolving as it tends to, but I'm at this point where spirituality is just acknowledging that I have a spirit inside of me, and so does everybody else. And like connecting those spirits is something that is profound, and I can't explain it, but it's important. And it is something that I think is such a critical part of how we take care of ourselves, because we find meaning in the day-to-day stuff at that point. Even something as simple as like the rituals of taking care of your skin, right? I consider that almost a spiritual practice at this point, because it's something that I'm taking care of my largest organ. I am taking care of the way that I feel about myself. It's fostering a deeper relationship with me. And, that's arguably a very important relationship as well. I'm curious, how has this conversation around spirituality changed how you approach relationships, be that with a relationship with yourself, with your family, with your friends?
Yeah, I mean, I love Dr. Miller's generous definition of it because I found it a struggle in my own life to kind of find my own spiritual path. And it's been such a zigzag journey of it. I didn't grow up with, really structured, organized religion, but see a lot of value in it for those that do subscribe to it and kind of understand the impact. I think that there is like such narrow windows in time when you can make these life changes. And as you know, we recently moved to Miami within the past year. And part of that was to be outside, to be in nature, to be closer to the water, to be closer to the ocean, to be able to put feet in the sand and feel grounded. And I've found nature to be that spiritual practice and ritual for myself that was missing from my life. And I think there's also, kind of going back to the connection piece that you asked about, we haven't been taught how to build connections. And I think especially with women, there's a need to prioritize it in the same way that we do other aspects of our life. There was a recent Wall Street Journal article about how women are literally calendaring it in and, kind of treating it the same way they would a work KPI to make sure it happens. And I kind of love that because I think sometimes we need a little bit of a push. It's always so many times you go out with friends and, most times you come back and you feel better and you feel nurtured and you feel restored. And it's also about reaching out to people who you lost touch with, if that's a relationship that serves you. And being thoughtful and intentional about the energy and friendships that you introduce into your life and, being a good friend for the ones that you have so that that energy comes back your way.
Yeah. I want to talk about some of the other findings in the book, specifically, as we talk about nutrition and sleep. And, what I always say on this podcast is everything is skincare, right? Sleeping 8 hours is skincare. Eating a balanced diet is skincare. One thing that I hope that we get across on this podcast and at mindbodygreen and the beauty content is that, no product is going to be able to replace the simple act of taking care of yourself. Like no eye cream in the world is going to fix not sleeping enough. And so I want to talk about, some of the pillars that you guys write about with this. And I know that sleep is very important to you. And that and that you have a journey with sleep yourself. So, I consider you quite well versed in this subject. So, I want to dive into sleep a little bit. From a beauty perspective, I know that sleep is when your skin repairs collagen. It is it is when human growth hormones are released, and that is the critical hormone in repairing your skin barrier. It's the time that your skin has a chance to literally rejuvenate itself. And if you do not get that, if you do not get the REM cycle, your skin literally cannot rejuvenate itself. Which has obviously huge implications for how it looks, how it functions, how it's able to take care of you, how it's able to function as an immune barrier, all of the things. So we all need to figure out how to sleep better. Yeah. What are some of the things that you have learned in your own journey, and then also with writing this book? What are your pillars of sleep?
Yeah. So from, my history with sleep is so personal. In my early 20s, I ended up in the hospital because I didn't sleep for 3 nights, and I needed something to help me get to sleep. They gave me a Xanax, and that was kind of where my sleep etiquette conversation started and stopped. And since then, it's been a lifelong journey to kind of bring my sleep back into balance. And if you don't eat well for a couple weeks, you'll probably be okay. If you miss some days at the gym or working out, you're going to be okay. You don't sleep for 3 days, literally. You're not going to be the same human. So I'm so glad that there's been a reawakening around sleep. We moved from, a bit of the hustle culture into sleep fitness, and that it's something people prize. I've really had to find my own rhythm with it. I think being here in Florida has made it easier to kind of go with the natural light ebb and flow, so I can get my early sunlight, which you're supposed to get within 90 minutes of waking, a little bit easier than in New York. I'm very thoughtful and intentional about my caffeine curfew. I cut off caffeine so much earlier than those who are able to metabolize it, probably like 10:30 or 11. Thoughtful about room temperature, keep our room at 65 degrees. And, here is a place where I do have some frosting in my life. In Miami, we sleep on a 8-sleep cooling mattress, which has been a really nice adjustment here. But it's also about understanding that you don't want this sleep anxiety to overcome you, because there's an interesting study that having an alarm clock in your room can actually exacerbate that pre-sleep worry and make it even harder to go to sleep. So I think that's kind of an important part of all things health and well-being, is you never want it to get to a place where it kind of becomes all consuming and it literally sucks the joy out of it for you. So, here's some places where we literally, break the rules. Jason and I do watch TV in bed, and it does not have a big impact on my ability to fall asleep. We are thoughtful about what programming we watch, but any sleep expert would tell you not to watch TV in bed. But this is a place that brings us a lot of joy. We find it really hard to kind of take our brains out of work. And so it helps us kind of go into a different universe and learn about, right now we're really enjoying the Netflix Formula One series. So it just transports us to a different place. And then another place where I've kind of broken the rules and made them work a little bit better for myself is alcohol has a profound impact on my sleep. And I did learn that from the 2 weeks in which I wore my Oura ring. But instead of cutting it out, I try to just have it earlier in the day where it's going to have less of an impact on sleep. So yes, I have my margaritas at lunch instead of at dinner, ideally with friends. And while there's really no health benefits to alcohol besides the ritual and joy, that it brings, I'll have to caveat this with, of course, if you haven't started drinking, you probably shouldn't start.
Honestly, though, you talking about watching TV in bed and, your relationship with alcohol, that makes me feel better, because I am somebody who I tend to like get a little bit of a shame spiral around sleep and like my habits around them. And I'm not even somebody who really struggles with sleep in a profound way. I definitely, I know that I'm lucky in that regard. I know a lot of people do have much deeper issues with sleep than I, but it is something that we have built up so much pressure around sleep hygiene that, if we don't do it perfectly, then you're not getting, the full 8 hours or whatever. And I think it's good to just like lighten that load a little bit and just understand that it's okay. Like it's okay to live a little.
Totally. And sometimes we can get a little too rigid in the health and wellness world.
Yeah. One thing that I learned through mindbodygreen is, it's like your sleep routine starts the second you wake up. And, you mentioned that with circadian rhythm and like getting your 90 minutes of sunlight in the morning. And that's something that has like definitely changed my relationship with sleep, of just being like, okay, like the second I wake up, that is when my nighttime routine starts. And I think that's such an interesting approach to it, which I certainly have learned from the folks here at mindbodygreen. Okay, so let's talk nutrition. The gut skin axis is very real. I think for so long in the skincare space and the beauty space, people liked to pretend that it wasn't, and that there wasn't this deep connection between what you eat and what your skin looks like. But through just an abundance of research over the last like decade and a half, we know that the gut skin axis is just one of the most important influences on our skin. And what we eat can influence how much collagen we produce. And, it can influence acne. There's certainly a lot of foods that you eat that can trigger breakouts. It can send our skin into an inflamed state, which can not only trigger things like eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, any sort of inflammatory skin condition. It can cause, long-term chronic micro-inflammation, which is what's going to be causing, dark spots, fine lines, crepey skin, all those things, those aesthetic things that we, tend to want to avoid. All of those can be triggered through an inflammatory diet. What are some of the pillars of nutrition that you stand by and that, you talk about within the book and broadly?
Yeah, so this is probably a place where our point of view has changed over the past decade. And I think it's always important to acknowledge like the science changes. If there's one thing we are rigid about, it's about being flexible. Not just because of the science, but because what worked in my 20s isn't going to work in my 30s and isn't going to work in my 40s. And, we talk about those times when a lot of times we're able to understand and predict what's going to really strike a chord in the Mind Body Green community. But this was one, when we published this study, it had such a profound impact on my own thoughts on nutrition. And it definitely caused a bit of a firestorm within our own comments. And I'm going to share the study because it did have such a profound impact on kind of both how I move and what I eat. So it's, if you're over 65, there's a 25% chance that you'll fall. And if you do fall, studies show that your chances of falling again double. And if you fall and break your hip, then there is a 30 to 40% chance that you will die within a year. And it's not from the fall, it's from everything associated with it. It could be a hospital stay, it could be depression, it could be an infection, so many other things. But when I think of my whys now, we already talked about mental health and my girls, but it's also about envisioning the type of life I want 30, 40 years from now, and what type of mind and body I want. And I think wellness in the 2010s wasn't really about building muscle and building armor and kind of building that body to protect yourself from that fall, so that maybe you can put out an arm, maybe your balance is better in check. And a lot of these falls happen at nighttime, so maybe you're just of a little better mind and body, so you don't actually have the fall. And I bring this study to light because when you ask about food and movement, I found that over the years, these two go hand in hand. So as trends in one discipline evolves, so does the nutrition trend that follows it. And in the 2010s, it was such a fantastic time to be in New York and wellness. There was it was a buffet of options. There was also a lot of yoga and Pilates kind of at the forefront of this movement. And yoga is typically connected to a more vegetarian lifestyle where you have to be more intentional to get your protein intake. Now, when you fast forward to 2023 and people are thinking about building that muscle armor, people are thinking about falls, people are thinking about nutrition in a new way. And now I am super thoughtful about my protein intake because I want it to go hand in hand with kind of building up that armor. So, something I'm frankly working on is getting my 30 grams of protein at every meal. It's a big divergence from the way I ate in the 2010s, the past decade of life. And that's probably the biggest change, while of course, trying to eat as much real food as we can, fill in the plate with some veggies. But that piece has always come a little bit more naturally to me. The protein piece requires some intentionality and thought.
Just to highlight a little bit on the protein aspect, I have noticed in the beauty space, one thing that I have been hearing more and more lately from dermatologists who tend to skew with more holistic angle, or skincare experts who tend to, fall in this realm, is prioritizing getting the 30 grams of protein, or, getting protein or upping your protein intake. You hear this because, you want the amino acids for your collagen and elastin production, right? But it's also such a critical part of how our face ages. One thing that I've been thinking a lot about is, when we talk about skin longevity, it's not just the actual skin, it's everything that lives below it, right? You have muscles on your face, you have bones in your face, you have the lymph system, you have all of these things that work together to create your beautiful face, right? And you need to support them through the aging process as well. And so I think it's really interesting that you're seeing a lot of beauty experts talk about nutrition, not just in the sense of, if you eat antioxidants, then your skin will be glowing, but truly, you need to eat the right nutrition in order to support your muscles and your bones, because that will, improve the look of your skin as you age. And so beauty always tends to follow the health industry in a lot of ways. So I think it's interesting that we're even starting to see this shift with a handful of beauty experts. It's quite fascinating.
And whatever brings more people into the conversation. There's going to be some people that are inspired by the beauty outcomes. There's going to be some people that are inspired by, building their armor, protecting themselves from sarcopenia, whatever it may be, whatever gets you there.
Totally. Couldn't agree more. We have talked a little bit about the mental health aspect and the connection aspect throughout this episode. It's obviously, a very critical part of the conversation that you're having. I just want to take another second to talk about it here within the context of everything is skincare. We always say that beauty is a means of connection for a lot of folks. And it's how a lot of people, they bond with each other, whether that be at a hair salon, whether that be your weekly nail appointment. I remember during the pandemic, when I got my hair done for the first time, when they had just opened up the salons, I chatted with my hairstylist, and I just remember being, I told her, I'm like, you're the first person who's touched me in months, because I lived alone, and we had a conversation about it. And she said that I get people in the chair and they literally start crying because they just miss that connection. So clearly connection is so important with beauty as well. Like I really do think it's a bigger part of the beauty conversation that tends to not happen, but that's why I'm so excited that you guys are having it, right? And we're having this conversation about bonding and, finding joy through other people. I want to talk about how you go about fostering those connections in your own life. And because you have been studying this, how have you taken what you've learned and implemented it into how you live day to day?
So it's honestly a place where I had to do a lot of work, because When I lived in New York for 13 years, I think I just got really comfortable and complacent. And prior to 2020, I was going into an office with bustling, inspiring people who I got to connect with every day. And when that got removed from my life, I realized kind of the missing hole that there was. And sometimes some of us are lucky enough to get that connection through work. Sometimes it's through other parts of life. And for me, it was a really big realization of, how much I missed people. And when we have these narrow moments in time, like we do now when we move to Miami, like community is such an important part of kind of how we live our lives here. And we are, making our home here for the next 15 years and have just been so much more kind of putting out the effort first and putting ourselves in those situations that I might have shied away from back in New York, where you're asking a woman out for the first time, maybe being a little bit aggressive on the texting front, and putting yourselves in those uncomfortable situations to make some new friends. And the beauty of kind of what's happening in the city right now is there's a wonderful kind of expat community of New Yorkers and Brooklynites and other folks who, have shared values and are at a similar trajectory on the life journey. So it's been really easy to kind of make those friends and connections. But if someone is looking to start and they don't quite know where, I'd go back to, the main question of this all is, what is it that brings you joy? So, Alex, clearly you're a savant in all things beauty, like probably in the beauty community would be a great place to start. And finding those activities where it does nurture you, where it does speak to your soul, that's probably where you're going to find your people.
Sure. I want to ask, out of everything that we've talked about today and everything that you wrote about the book and everything that you've done, even, at mindbodygreen, what is the biggest takeaway that you want people to walk away with, knowing and understanding?
It goes back to the two things. If you're not really sure of where to start on this health and well-being journey, you need to take the self-inventory. Ask yourself, what's working? What's not working? Where am I finding joy in my life? And really think about that personal mission statement that Arthur Brooks has coined that term of where you want to be going. And then health and wellness can be so overwhelming. What you don't want to do is be like, wow, there's lots to do. I'll try to do everything at once. It's how do you focus on what's going to yield the best results for you? How do you focus on what's going to have the highest ROI? Start there before you think of anything else. And, my wish for everyone is I had that breakdown moment and, a long journey to, help cultivate a well-lived life. And my hope for people is that they don't have to wait until they have that breakdown moment, but that they're asking themselves, hey, how can my life be a little bit better right now? And that they don't have to have those dark moments before they start cultivating positive changes and raising the bar a little bit more.
Well, I love that answer. And the last thing that I always ask all of my guests is how they take care of themselves. I tend to ask this to beauty professionals. So this tends to be a lot of, skincare, makeup, hair care, which I definitely invite you to share your skincare routine, but it's also how you take care of yourself as a whole. So, what are the pillars of your well-being routine?
So at this point in life, 2 kids, business, no matter what life stage you're at, everyone's so busy. So the key word for me is always about integration and how do we fit something into our life instead of adding something that may add more complexity, unless, of course, that addition brings you lots of joy. So, one example would be breath work. I am such a big fan of nasal breathing. One, because it's, when we think of ROI, such a great place to start. You're breathing 17,000 to 30,000 times a day, and it activates, when you breathe through your nose, your rest and digest system. So for those of us that maybe run a little bit anxious, it's such a great way to just cultivate a little bit more calmness in our lives. So that's one way. Movement is another way. I've definitely gravitated more towards opportunities to do more resistance training. I've started with kettlebells, here in Miami, which is a new evolution. And then, I still love a great beauty day too. I recently had, an afternoon of being outside, then having a facial and having a Haman kind of experience after it. And I felt transported to another world. Now, in living here a year, it was the first time I did it. It's not something I can incorporate every day, but definitely kind of reset my equilibrium in life.
Well, Colleen, this was such a joy to have you on. I I am so happy we were able to make this work, and I loved having this conversation with you. And I love all of the insights that you shared today. I obviously, for working for mindbodygreen, this is something that I feel very passionate about, and I'm so happy we were able to have this conversation. And I know our listeners will leave this conversation hopefully feel a little bit more enriched. So thank you.
What a joy to be able to connect with you, and so great to catch up.